Frau Baerbock.
Mrs. Baerbock, this month you were re-elected as the chairman of the co-chairman of the Greens. 97.1%. That's an outstanding result, nearly Soviet result. And your partner, your co-chairman, Robert Habeck, he left behind like 7%, and you were still pretty composed when you went onto the stage to thank the people. Were you composed? Well, first of all, good evening. Thank you very much that we can talk about foreign policy at this late hour. No, I was touched by this, but I also learned that in the top position to keep my emotions under control. But yes, I think that the party congress actually showed what we tried. So Robert Habeck and May, for the leaders of the Greens, for those who are not familiar with Green policy, so we've always got a double leadership. It's a man and a woman as party leaders. And over the past 2 years, we tried to make it clear that we're a team and that the party congress actually supported this cause so much. We were very happy about this, and was also our mandate for the next 2 years. So right after that, so also after that result with which you actually surpassed Robert Habeck, the question was Chancellor. So we don't reckon that you're going to say anything about this tonight, and that's normal, but so aren't you a bit dizzy when you hear that word, Chancellor? Well, a lot has changed over the past 2 years, and again, this is international audience, and we've got the situation in Germany that we've got 4 to 5 parties that always played a role, but a long time it was only 2 large, strong parties, and then smaller political parties, but that has changed much over the past 2 years, and that's a gigantic responsibility that we have, and that is on our shoulders, and we hope to make the best of it and implement this. And what is important, and I think that is why some people, so maybe not every, they don't share every position we have, but they said, well, we trust you're doing a good job, so not just circling about your own interests, and that's why we're not answering any questions about Chancellor. So there's national elections 2 years' time. We've seen what can happen in 2 years' time, like Fridays for Future. Then we've got Brexit, and then all the challenges with the trade conflicts in the world. So there's so many things that can be toppled and put from the head onto the feet. So in this time of breaks is to make policy now instead of like what is going to happen in 24 months and maybe totally different. So how do you manage this? So you said said, okay, you're going to be a good team that not just circles about their own interests, and that is something you may want to do, and but it might not always work out. So how can you do that? That at least to the outside, you give this harmonious impression, at least with Robert Habeck. I suppose it requires a lot of discipline if there's differences in opinions, which you might have. Well, on the one hand, it's an understanding of policy and policy making and how you want to lead. It's not just to see, okay, there's one player and he'll do it all alone. But I personally am very much determined by spots. And you know, this will only work in the team. So it's not enough if you've got just one forward, and if the defense is totally wrong, then you have to act together, the forward and the defense. And this is how we can only go about societal processes, by including all kinds of players and to count on their strengths as well as to recognize this weakness of yourself. And if we act in a team, it's good if everyone can contribute their strengths. So we might have weakness, and every person has weaknesses, and somebody else can take over that role. But it means you have to communicate a lot with one another, and I believe that especially in this digitized world, you have to communicate in person with one another. So create moments where you are face-to-face in a discussion, because this is how you can say quite clearly, well, I would have done it differently, but to do that behind closed doors and not in the public eye. So trust has grown over the past 2 years. And in practical terms, so if you don't come together in one issue that you might talk on the telephone or whatever, and then you will not have that conflict in public, but behind closed doors. Yeah, and as I said, so to make policy decisions right now, in the now, and not It doesn't mean ad hoc, but it means just, okay, let's think together. What are the subjects that are important to us both? For instance, the climate issue is something that is in the green DNA. And for me, it's clear that the climate neutral transformation can only be accomplished if we can restructure the economy totally. So it's clear to me that the question of economic policy is one of the major issues for our parties when we look at back the past 2 years and look forward. And we have to sit around the table and think about what are the areas like industry policy, digitization, and then have a discussion up front. So what do you imagine it to be? Or so do you object anything or do you have anything against climate taxes or customs? And so we're not to take the initiative there. So then to find whether there's a difference in opinions and maybe also have a public debate about that. We did that, for instance, social policy with the issue of basic income, yes or no. That is a subject that is being discussed intensively in our party, but then to handle this offensively, that we've got two different positions there. And we want to have a discussion together without saying, well, the other guy doesn't have a clue. No, rather to have our discussion and have a debate within our party. Well, so the Greens, not just in Germany, but in Europe, the Greens are high flyers. The German Greens had more than 20% in the European elections. Others had outstanding results. You've got good people, and you're not a divided party. So to the outside, you have a one face. So do you say that you're already a government party, able to participate in the government, or are you still? So when we look at Germany, we are governing in 9 federal states. We're a part of the government in 9 federal states, and we're now, in January, we're going to turn 40 as a Green Party in Germany. So we're looking back on 40 years of history as a Green Party, and maybe for people from outside Germany, it might be interesting to know that we've got many years that we actually co-governed the country, especially with foreign policy, with Joschka Fischer as a foreign minister then. So we as a Green Party had the debate in proxy for the society. So will there be war missions abroad with the participation of Germany? So that was a subject that really created a great discussion. So we went to Bielefeld with our party conference, and 20 years ago we were there, so where they had the paint bags, and that decision was taken. Sure, we have a government responsibility. We've had it, and so it's some time that it was at national level, but there's so many issues that we want to change, and you can do that best if you co-design, and that's why we said quite clearly at the party conference, yes, we do want to accept the responsibility to also for the large issues of transformation, especially if you are in the government in the federal state. Okay, you want to govern and co-govern. Very early on, you had a political socialization. You said about yourself that you grew up in a hippie household. Well, that's not true. I learnt that in my 2 years. I did say it, sure, but that was just an offhand remark. So now, so that I think it was like so. This at the very beginning, there was some interview when I became the party chairwoman, and they said Annalena Charlotte Anna Baerbock, and it sounds like it's a feudal name. No, but it was my grandma's name. So everyone said Alma. What name is that? Alma. So and I said no. It's not feudal, but actually it was rather a hippie household. And my parents said, what are you saying about us? So, but indeed, I was born in 1980, so when our party was founded. And in Germany, many were dealing with Gorleben in nuclear industry in Germany. And my parents were part of the demonstration. And you were part of a demonstration at the age of 2?
Macht man mit 2 eher nicht. Ja. Aber bei den Anti-Pershing-Demonstrationen, genau.
Stimmt denn die Geschichte, dass Sie, als Sie vom Zweiten Golfkrieg in der Zeitung gelesen haben, dann müssen Sie 10 oder 11 gewesen sein, dann 1991, sich dafür eingesetzt haben, dass aus Rücksicht auf die Opfer des Golfkrieges in Ihrer Schule der Kinderfasching ausfällt?
Ja, und auch da habe ich mich gefragt, dass ich überhaupt noch Freunde in der Schule hatte. Aber ich weiß nicht, das sind ja alles so Fragen, wo man denkt, wo kommt sowas her? Ich hatte von früh an irgendwie, ja, als 10-Jährige viel auch schon immer mal wieder in der Zeitung, die bei uns zu Hause rumlag, oder auch Amnesty International Magazine darin geblättert, und damals mit Blick auf Golfkrieg und das, was da passiert ist, hat mich als Kind schon sehr mitgenommen und bewegt, und habe bei uns in der Grundschule, als die Frage war mit Fasching feiern, das waren damals ja auch wirklich...
When the question came about having the carnival, I addressed this issue of the Gulf War and the victims at school. I do not remember, did we have a carnival that year or not? But of course you could already had some political ambitions. Now, you are the more experienced person as the party chairperson in terms of foreign policies. You said Germany must be capable of conducting a policy in a geopolitical arena and must be an independent peace power. What does that mean for you? I was always interested in foreign policy, even when I was very young. And I studied in London, I studied international law, and that is why I'm not only interested and passionate about foreign policy, I'm also interested in the international law standards and norms, and that is very important in a world where we have more and more multilateralism disappearing. And the question is, what does Europe do? I mean, in the old days, we looked at the transatlantic relations and we said, well, there is the United States, and they have the values that we can subscribe to and will be with them through NATO and EU-US relations. This is no longer the case as it used to be in the past. We see the United States playing another role today, and the European Union must think about whether it wants to be a power standing up for peace, a peace power, as we say in German. And so therefore, I think we must focus more on a cooperation in the field of security and defense policy. And for that purpose, we need majority decisions on the level of the European Union to be able to be active. And that will bring us Europeans into a new situation. And of course, that's not so easy, given the fact that the United Kingdom wants to leave the EU now. You are not afraid of taboos. And you demanded the establishment of a European army during your party congress, and that is something not all the party members will agree to. How could such a European army, such European armed forces be created, and what would be the attitude of your rank-and-file party membership in the Green Party? I mean, definitely, it's nothing that will be established overnight. It's just a question of where do we want to go as the European Union? And in recent decades, we said, yes, NATO is going to take care of security, and the European Union will be in charge of upholding our values. But as I can see it nowadays, this division between the two components no longer is justified. And so we need to think more about sharing and pooling in the field of defense policy. We need more EU-wide capacities, and then step by step we'll be able to say that we do not need 27 or 28 different armies. We need joint battle groups. We need a stronger integration of the national armed forces. Of course, many things must be done before that happens. We see that in the field of arms exports. We need binding rules applicable to all countries. Based on the German past, we have a regulation where any such activity will have to be based on agreement of parliament, and many countries don't have the same system. And so we must think about how we develop our capacities and what does it mean for our relationship to NATO. But nowadays, when we think about defense budgets, we have to think what to do. Are we going to do it alone on a national level, or are we going to rather focus on a pooling and sharing system and develop future joint projects? We have controversial debates about that in our party. We are right in the process of developing principles where foreign policy will be a major parameter. And it will be an interesting debate. And in 1 year from now, we are going to have our principles, our party program. But you hope very much you will get the support of your membership, saying that in a couple of years from now, we would like to have a European armed forces. You think that people will agree? The target is not to have an army, is not to have armed forces. The goal will be to uphold the peace order in the 21st century in a world that gets more and more polarized, where we have the feeling that as far as digitization is concerned, decisions are taken by just two systems, China and a capitalist US system that uses blackmail as an instrument. And we need to establish our position. And for me, the goal is a strong European Union that has common values, standards, norms in a globalized world. And I think such a strong European player can only be created if we have also a stronger European element in the field of defense and security policies. So for me, stronger cooperation and the perspective of a European armed forces is one way for us to become a self-confident European Union in the 21st century. This is not only your goal, it's also the goal of Emmanuel Macron. So you must have liked his diagnosis of NATO. Did you share what he said after the Turkey offensive in Syria? You demanded a special session of the Security Council to stop this. What is your attitude vis-à-vis Mr. Macron's position? The question is, what do you want to achieve, and what is the wording you use in order to achieve what you want to get? If you said the NATO is brain dead, that means it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we cannot say we'll bury NATO. We as Europeans can no longer take care of our own security. And what would it mean for the Eastern Europeans and the Baltic states? For them, it is very important not only to have security promises on paper. I mean, what's the use of a Budapest memorandum that says we guarantee your protection? Look at the Ukraine. They have given away their nuclear weapons, and at the end of the day, it's the Russian troops being present on Crimea. So you cannot just simply say, okay, let's do away with NATO and let's see what happens then. No. He didn't say it that way, Mr. Macron. But saying that NATO is brain dead, it doesn't mean he wanted to have a dialogue how to also use NATO for our future defense policy. So his wording would not have been mine, but at a time where we have two NATO partners in Syria, not only for the last 3 months, we had the same situation 1.5 years ago. There were two NATO partners opposing each other in Syria. What does that mean for a defense alliance? And what does it mean for a defense alliance? Is it still an alliance of values? Is it really functioning still? And I think that is a discussion that we have to have on the level of NATO, very transparently and openly. And when we think of NATO, we have to see how can we as European be more active here. And of course, the European Union doesn't have the US as members. And so we cannot simply say, okay, we're going to have a European army. And the question is, we don't care about the transatlantic alliance anymore. We cannot do that. And the strength of NATO is that we within NATO also have a dialogue format with Russia. The EU doesn't have that. So when we talk about security policy, we have to think of a process that will take a couple of years and cannot just be triggered at the push of a button. I mean, imagine you were a member of government. For many European partners, you might be a partner that is much more active in terms of security defense policies in Europe than the present German government. Are there any European countries who try to establish contacts to the Green parties because they think, well, they might have a chancellor in a couple of years from now and we'd better be in touch with them? Yes. But I also feel that independent of us as the Green Party. Germany is the largest country in Europe, and we have always shaped the Euro integration process. The Eastern enlargement, the introduction of the Euro, none of that would have happened hadn't Germany said, we want it, we are convinced that this is right. It is right to give away the Deutschmark and introduce the euro. It would strengthen our European peace process. And I think this is a passion that we are currently missing in Europe, fighting passionately for the great goals in Europe, although people might not always agree. But if you don't have a sense of clarity where to go, you will not get the support of the people. And this is what we'd like to achieve. When we look at the European Union, we'd like to think about what would be a meaningful next step to take. And here in Germany, but also in other European countries, I have this feeling, okay, people just want to keep the status quo. But we've seen during the Euro crisis, we cannot just say, let's wait and see. And things will be all right. We will see other players coming in, like the financial market. If the politicians did not impose the rules, they would impose rules on us. And we also have the right-wing populists. AfD in Germany did not emerge in 2015. It emerged in the middle of the Euro crisis. It is a party that established itself as an anti-Euro and anti-European party. That should have been a warning. We have to be passionate about them. About this project. If we as Democrats are not passionate enough to build Europe, some other forces will come up and destroy it. So when it goes, when we talk about transition of industries and societies, we have to take our steps together. And that is also true for foreign policy. It's not just the question of defining what defense is all about. It's also a question of what can the single market achieve. How can we develop standards for artificial intelligence? How about Huawei? We have to give European answers. Because if we don't do it, it will no longer just be a technology question, but a political and security relevant one. We have Iran and the JCPOA. Why were the Americans so destructive? Why did they destroy that? They wanted the dollar to keep the to be the guiding currency, and they could create a situation that companies are afraid, and countries are afraid to invest in Iran. If euro had been the guiding currency, this would not have been possible. So when we look at a common financial policy for the next European Union, if we do not integrate security, we'll have a major problem. Of course, I have to say something about climate and the ecological transformation you have announced. You have said it should be also a social transformation, and one of the most urgent topics regarding the challenges of our times in our survey conducted by Körber, 31% of the people said climate is our most important challenge, and you have said the ecological transformation must have a social component. So you want to link climate protection with social justice. We won't be able to define all that in detail, but maybe you can give us a brief explanation about what you think can happen and will happen. Well, it's not either social justice or climate protection. That would be a wrong narrative. We have climate effects, environmental effects, and it's always the weakest strata of society suffering most. If we conduct a good environmental policy, it always means strengthening social rights, like, for instance, pollution in the rivers worldwide. That affects those people who have no clean drinking water. Or when we talk about NOx limits for cars in Germany, where we have people living on the fringes of town, they cannot buy the houses that are not bordering on the major and polluted motorways. You have said we need a CO2 tax of 60 euros per ton, the government has lower limits, and of course those taxes, if they were imposed, would have to be also paid by the less affluent people. I mean, of course, the measures that you have to carry out to protect climate will have a social dimension as well. You cannot do everything just on the basis of a price. That is why we say it is not our policy to just focus on the price, because then we will have social distortions. We have many other political instruments that we have to apply as well. But there must be a price component as well, otherwise we will have a distortion of the market. And polluters should not be rewarded for what they do. And that will have, of course, repercussions on people who can no longer afford to buy petrol. That is why our proposal for the CO2 price is concerned that all income generated on the basis of the CO2 price should be given back to the people. This is done in Switzerland already. This is done in Canada already, so we didn't invent it. And then low-income households can benefit over proportionally, and that creates a better social balance. And if I may add one more aspect, Germany and also the European Union, and here we are different from many regions of the world, the strength of our societies in Europe is that we see our states as social states. This accompanied the market economy in its entire development. That is why we call it a social market economy. And that is why we consider it absolutely necessary for the political level to define the social standards like minimum wages and many more aspects. That is why we want to call our market economy an ecological and social market economy. And we need this environmental dimension because we cannot afford our environment be destroyed, and we have set standards in a social market economy. And now look at German steel. It is no longer competitive compared to dumping or steel at dumping prices. But if Germany says we want to use a certain share of climate neutral steel for the automotive manufacturing industry, then industry will start inventing technologies like running the furnace for steel production with in a CO2 neutral way or with hydrogen. So these climate protection measures will be able also to save the jobs and take them into the 21st century. At the end of our interview, I'd like to ask you one more question. You have said it's very difficult still for women to be active in politics. Oftentimes, if men have no more argument, they just use the female factor in order to emphasize the differences. I did not complain about the difficulty that women have. I've just stated that when I became party chairwoman, I was surprised to see all these aspects. I mean, we have fought as women for universal suffrage, and then we were allowed to work, and all of that was achieved in a great struggle. And when we talk about women's rights nowadays, we see a massive rollback on a worldwide scale. In the US, in Russia, in Turkey, immediately, women's rights are the first to be targeted and to be rolled back. I mean, nowadays, if you are a battered woman and you go to the police, immediately they would pursue your case. They don't anymore. You have to be hospitalized before the police takes care of that. And we see this tendency. We see it also in the German society, not on this massive scale, but still we see parties that attack our democratic system. And time and again, they ask about the role of women. How many children should women have? And the achievements of women are being rolled back. And at the same time, we see instigation to hatred in the social media. And whenever they attack women, they can say the Green Party is stupid and your climate policy is meaningless. And oftentimes, you just read in Twitter, well, you should be raped. this is something we don't see, this hatred uttered against men. And so this female argument usually is used, or they accuse you of having too high-pitched a voice or talking too fast. And that's a topic that we need to address. Here, women are a special group and are under special attack, and that also concerns minority. Here we need an early warning system, and we always have to address this.
So you did it within a short period of time, not just be the woman at Robert's side, but we can continue for ages, but I'm not allowed to do that. It was very nice that you were here, Mrs. Baerbock. You're going to sit here, and Mr. Powers, I think, wants to say thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalena, Britta, for this wonderful conversation. Dear friends, we have reached the end of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, 9th edition. There's one more point on the agenda, which is we invite you to join us for dinner at 7:30 in the restaurant Austernbank, which is when you leave the building, turn left, and it's right there. Let me say a few words of thanks. First, I would like to thank the Federal Foreign Office, Sebastian Groth, his colleagues from the policy planning staff for the excellent cooperation. I would like to thank our partners, the Pew Research Center, the Atlantic Council, the Institut Montagne, Aspen Institute, Al-Sharq Forum, and all our media partners, der Spiegel, Deutsche Welle, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Tagesspiegel, Euraktiv, and Le Monde Diplomatique. We look forward to working with you also next year. And finally, a big thank goes to the team of Nora Müller, and in particular the core team of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum and the Berlin Pulse, Jana Fix, Christoph Heilmeier, Theresa Kirch, Josh Webb, Leonie Stamm, Xenia Kelemen, Alisa Vogt, Maike Kahlert, and Barbara Pongratz, as well as all other colleagues from Berlin and Hamburg who have helped to make this Berlin Foreign Policy Forum a success. Thank you very much. It's a privilege working with you. Here they are. The Berlin Foreign Policy Forum will take place next year, and it might be November 24. See you next year. Thank you very much.